single dad, took in a frozen stranger, then said, "You're coming with me." Not knowing she was a CEO. The storm had no mercy. Snow hurled sideways through the streetlights, slashing across the empty sidewalks like tiny blades. Wind screamed between the buildings, howling like something wounded. Midnight had come and gone, but the streets of Queens lay deserted, buried beneath a rising tide of white. Silas Cade adjusted his grip on the sleeping bundle in his arms, his 6-year-old daughter Ava, her head tucked against his shoulder, her little breath fogging his coat. She weighed more when she was asleep, like the whole day had settled into her bones. He shifted her gently, his work boots crunching in the snow as he made the long walk home from the overnight shift. Then he saw her. A figure at the bus stop slumped sideways on the metal bench. Her legs were stretched awkwardly as if they'd given out beneath her. Her coat, some expensive-looking thing, was dusted with snow. She wasn't moving. Silas stopped cold. Was she? No, not tonight. He stepped off the sidewalk without thinking, crossing the street with long strides, shielding Ava with one arm and calling out, "Ma'am, hey, are you okay?" No answer. He reached her and crouched low. Ava stirred, murmuring softly, "Daddy." "It's okay, baby. Just give me a second." The woman's eyes were half open but glazed her lips pale blue. Her hands trembled where they rested in her lap. A faint gash glistened on her forehead, already crusting in the cold. Blood. Not much, but enough. "Hey," he said more firmly, "can you hear me?" A beat. Then her lips moved, barely a whisper. "I missed the bus." "Yeah," he muttered. "You and every train in this storm." Silas looked around. Nothing. No cars, no cabs, not even a damn delivery guy. He sighed sharply, shifting Ava with one arm and shrugging off his coat. "All right," he said to the stranger. "You're coming with me." Her eyes flickered. "What?" "I said," he repeated, "you're coming with me. You're freezing. You're hurt. And this snow isn't stopping." She tried to sit up straighter, but her knees buckled. "I don't know you," she rasped. "You don't need to. I'm not asking for your trust. Just trying to make sure you don't die out here." He pulled his coat around her. "You want to take your chances with frostbite, that's your call. But if you want to see tomorrow, get up." She looked at him, dazed. "Who are you?" "A janitor with a conscience," he replied flatly. And then softly from his shoulder, Ava asked, "Is she okay, Daddy?" The woman blinked, turning toward the child. Something flickered behind her eyes. Silas didn't wait for consent. He bent, grunted, and carefully lifted the woman into his arms, cradling her next to Ava. "You'll be all right," he murmured. "Just stay with me." His apartment was small and worn, the kind of place where you had to jiggle the front lock just right or it wouldn't open. The radiator hissed. The fridge buzzed, but it was warm. He laid the woman down gently on the old couch, grabbing a blanket from the back. Ava curled up in the armchair, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight. Silas wiped the woman's forehead with a damp cloth and examined the wound. Superficial. Probably slipped on the ice. He'd seen worse at construction sites. A butterfly bandage would do. She stirred again. Her voice was barely audible. "Where?" "My place," he said simply. "Until the road's clear." Her eyes darted, trying to make sense of the mismatched furniture, the faint smell of baby shampoo, the soft hum of a broken heater doing its best. "You live here?" "With your daughter." He nodded, sitting on the floor nearby. "Ava and I. Just us." She stared at him. "You shouldn't have helped me." He met her gaze steady. "You'd rather I left you there. I didn't ask you to save me." Silas's jaw tightened. "I know." He stood, moving to the kitchen. A moment later, he came back with a chipped mug of tea and set it on the table near her. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "Drink this. Rest. When the storm lets up, I'll get you a cab." She didn't respond. He turned to go, but her voice stopped him. "What's your name?" He hesitated. Then Silas. She nodded slowly. "Leora." Silas paused as if tasting the name. "You don't look like a Leora." She gave the faintest smile. "What do I look like?" "Like someone who's used to being in charge," he said, "and hates not being in control." There was a flicker of something behind her eyes, annoyance, amusement, maybe both. "I'll be out of your way soon," she muttered. "Take your time," Silas replied, heading for Ava's room. "The storm's not in a hurry. Neither am I." That night, as the wind howled through the cracks in the window panes and the snow stacked higher outside, Leora Vance lay in a stranger's apartment on a couch that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and childhood. She stared at the ceiling and wondered how the hell she'd ended up here, and why, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She felt safe. The next thing Leora remembered was light. Soft, flickering light washing across a ceiling she didn't recognize. The hiss of a radiator. The distant clink of ceramic. The faint scent of cinnamon. She stirred. Her body ached. Her head throbbed. But the strangest sensation of all, she was warm. For a moment, she didn't move. She just listened. Footsteps patted in the small kitchen. A kettle whistled. A child's voice giggled, followed by a soft shh from a man. That voice again. Low, rough, gentle. Silas. She remembered his name before she remembered where she was. She sat up too fast. The room spun. Her hand flew to her temple fingers, grazing a small bandage. A blanket had been wrapped tightly around her. Someone had removed her wet boots and set them by the radiator to dry. She looked down still in her own clothes coat folded neatly beside her. Across the room, Ava sat at a tiny table coloring her socked feet swinging. Silas stood by the stove pouring tea into a chipped mug. He turned when he heard her move. Their eyes met. "You're awake," he said. "No kidding," she muttered, wincing. "You moved fast enough for someone who could barely speak last night." "I have a meeting at 9, she replied automatically. Silas raised an eyebrow and handed her the mug. "Pretty sure that meeting's gonna have to wait. You passed out in a snowstorm, hit your head, and your phone's dead. Unless your meeting includes angels, you're not making it." Leora accepted the tea but didn't drink. "You should have left me there." He sat on the armrest of the chair opposite her, his expression unreadable. "People who say that never mean it." She looked at him. Really looked. There was something unsettling about how calm he was. Most men she knew would have either tried to impress her or avoid her. Silas did neither. He wasn't performing. He was just there. Unapologetically there. "I don't like debts," she said quietly. Silas shrugged. "Good. Because I'm not collecting." That stopped her. She blinked, surprised. "Everyone wants something." "Not everyone," he said. "Just the ones who never learned how to give." Leora didn't know what to do with that. It was too clean, too honest. No angle. No leverage. She took a sip of the tea. It was strong and a little bitter, but warm. "Where did you learn to bandage a head wound?" she asked. "My mom," he said. "She was a nurse in a free clinic. She could patch up anything with 3 fingers and a Band-Aid." Leora nodded slowly. "She sounds formidable." She was. A pause. "She died 5 years ago." "I'm sorry." He nodded. "So was I." Another pause. The kind that usually made her squirm. But somehow here in this tiny apartment with its mismatched furniture and buzzing heater, the silence felt earned. Respected. Ava looked up from her coloring. "Miss Leora, do you like bunnies?" Leora blinked. "Excuse me." Ava held up her picture proudly. A child's drawing, crude but full of heart. 3 stick figures under a sky full of snowflakes. 1 tall one small and one in the middle wearing a bright pink bow. A bunny floated beside them, oddly majestic. "That's you," Ava said, pointing to the figure in the middle. "Because you looked like a snow princess when Daddy carried you." Leora stared at the drawing. Something in her chest cracked open, something small and soft and entirely unguarded. I love it," she said, voice hoarse. Ava beamed. Silas watched the exchange quietly, then stood. "I'll get your phone charging. You probably want to call someone." "Yes, thank you." But as he walked away, she hesitated. "Wait." He turned back. She swallowed. "Did you carry me into the hospital?" Silas paused. "I wasn't sure if you remembered that part," he said. "I didn't. But I saw something. I think it was your coat. The ER staff didn't know who brought me in." He nodded. "That's how I wanted it." Leora frowned. "Why?" "Because you didn't need to wake up with another camera in your face," he said simply. "The city takes enough from you when you fall. You didn't need it taking your dignity too." Her throat tightened. For once, she had no words. She watched him disappear into the backroom footsteps, soft presence lingering like the heat from the tea mug in her hands. Leora stared out the frosted window. Snow still fell gentler now, like the storm had remembered its mercy. She had no idea who this man truly was. A janitor, a widower, a father. But there was something else. Something that wasn't written in his posture or his resume. A steadiness, a quiet. And suddenly she didn't want to leave just yet. Not because she was hurt, not because she owed him, but because for reasons she couldn't explain she felt safer here than she had in any penthouse suite boardroom or first-class flight. She turned to Ava. "Do you think your dad would let me stay a little longer?" Ava tilted her head. "He says people can stay if they're kind." "Are you kind?" Leora hesitated. "I'm learning." Later that morning, as the city slowly crawled back to life beneath plows and grit and exhausted commuters, Leora sat at a tiny kitchen table sipping lukewarm tea. Her phone buzzed with missed calls. Her assistant had texted, "Where are you?" in all caps. But she didn't answer. She was watching a man pack a school lunch with the precision of someone who'd learned to do everything with one hand while holding grief in the other. And for the first time in years, she was late for something, without feeling like she'd lost anything. 3 days later, the city returned to its usual chaos as if the blizzard had never happened. Subways screeched, taxis honked, and the sidewalks buzzed with the muted urgency of over-caffeinated New Yorkers rushing nowhere fast. Leora Vance stepped into the marble lobby of Vance Industries, every heel click echoing with familiar precision. Her coat was tailored, her hair was flawless, her silence was practiced, but something was off. The elevator doors closed behind her, sealing her inside a steel box lined with mirrored walls. She caught her reflection and didn't recognize it. "You don't owe me anything. Drink this. Rest. When the storm lets up, I'll get you a cab." Silas's voice lingered like heat in her chest, quiet, grounded, dangerous in its simplicity. There had been no follow-up, no text, no, "I hope you're okay." He'd let her walk away. Just like that, as if she were just anyone. Her assistant Amelia trailed behind her with a tablet, talking fast. "Board wants a full breakdown of the Copenhagen project. Investors are pushing for the quarterly call to move up. Oh, and Page 6 ran a piece about your disappearance." Leora blinked. Page 6. Amelia nodded, scrolling. "They're calling it a nervous breakdown in the snow. We didn't comment per your standing order, but—" She held up the screen. There it was, a blurry photo of Leora outside the ER 3 nights ago, half-conscious, supported by a man's arm. His face wasn't clear, but the outline, broad shoulders, dark coat, child's backpack slung over one shoulder was unmistakable. Silas. Leora took the tablet slowly, zoomed in. The scarf. It was hers, or rather, it was his. The same scarf he'd wrapped around her when she couldn't stop shaking. "Where was this taken?" she asked. "Security cam at Queen's General. They leaked it. Anonymous tip." Leora stared at the image, heart tapping harder. "Amelia," she said, her voice low, "can you request any public CCTV footage from outside that ER night of the storm? Timestamp around 12:45 a.m. Amelia blinked. "Of course. Do you want me to call?" "Legal no," Leora said. I want you to be discreet." Amelia hesitated. "Should I ask why?" Leora looked up. Her tone softened. "Because I don't want the world to see him." That night, Leora sat alone in her high-rise suite with the volume of the TV on low and her laptop open. A grainy video file loaded on the screen. She leaned forward. It was raining snow. Heavy. Blinding. But even through the white blur you could see him, Silas, running across the street with someone limp in his arms. Her. Ava clung to his side like a little shadow. He pushed through the ER doors without hesitation, shouting something to the nurse. He didn't linger. Less than 5 minutes later, he walked back out. Alone. Scarf missing. Shoulders hunched. Child's hand gripping his coat. He never looked back. Leora watched it again. And again. Then one more time, pausing at the moment where he stood in the lobby, the weight of a stranger in his arms, and no one else in the world knew his name. She sat back. Silas. Silas. What? The next morning, she asked Amelia to schedule a site inspection at one of the company's Midtown-sponsored public schools. Why that one? Amelia asked. We haven't finalized permits. I have a hunch. She didn't elaborate. The school was old, but solid. A red brick building with scuffed linoleum floors, motivational posters peeling slightly at the edges, and the kind of hallway smell that only came from a century of cafeteria spaghetti and chalk dust. Leora walked with the principal, an enthusiastic woman named Ms. Alvarez, who gestured animatedly toward the gym renovation. Maintenance. Here's a miracle, Alvarez said. We had to cut staff last year, but the guy we have now. Silas, he's a blessing. Does the work of 5. Leora's breath caught. Silas Cade. Yeah, widow. Little girl named Ava. Sweet kid. He brings her after school sometimes, lets her draw in the boiler room while he fixes pipes. Leora blinked. Boiler room. Miss Alvarez laughed. Don't worry, it's warmer than my office. They turned a corner and Leora froze. Through the glass window of the maintenance room she saw him. Silas kneeling beside a broken valve, sleeves rolled up, smudged with grease. Ava sat nearby with a stack of paper, humming as she colored. He didn't see her. And for a moment, Leora didn't move. There he was, the man who had saved her life, fed her tea in a cracked mug, wrapped her in warmth, and then disappeared as if that were normal. A man with no agenda, no angle, just kindness. She took a step forward, hand poised to knock. But then Silas looked up and laughed at something Ava said. A real laugh. Full. Deep. The kind that only came from people who hadn't needed applause to know their worth. Leora lowered her hand. She turned and walked away. That night, standing barefoot in her silent penthouse, Leora looked out over the city and whispered to the glass, he didn't want to be found. But the truth gnawed at her anyway. He hadn't wanted recognition. And yet, he had already changed everything. Silas stood at the end of the corridor, mop in one hand, toolbox in the other, staring at the flickering light above room 204. It was always room 204. No matter how many times he rewired it, changed the bulb, adjusted the fixture, by Friday, it flickered again like clockwork, almost like it was testing him. He sighed and set the mop aside. Ava, he called over his shoulder, you okay down there? Still coloring the dragon, she shouted from the maintenance room. He smiled to himself. That dragon had been evolving for 3 days. She refused to give it wings until its heart looked kind enough. Silas climbed the step stool, unscrewed the panel, and leaned into the wires. Across the hallway, Leora stood just out of sight, watching him through the gap in the office door. She hadn't meant to stop. She had only come by to drop off a check, a quiet donation to keep the arts program alive. But then she heard his voice. That steady, grounded cadence that made the rest of the world slow down. She peeked out again. Silas worked with a quiet competence. No hesitation. Just calm, precise movements. The kind of man who didn't rush even when the world expected him to. There was a stillness in him. And a sadness. Ava's voice rang down the hallway again. "Daddy, do you think dragons get lonely?" Silas didn't even look up. "Only the ones who forget how to breathe fire." Leora's heart twisted. That kind of answer, gentle, wise, and oddly poetic, didn't come from textbooks. It came from life. She turned to leave, but Miss Alvarez spotted her and waved cheerfully. "Miss Vance, I didn't know you were here today." Silas glanced down at the sound of the voice, and their eyes locked. The hallway grew quiet. Leora stepped forward, composed but unsure. "I was just dropping something off." Silas climbed down from the stool, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I figured the Dragon Fund just got a boost." She gave a small smile. "I might have added wings." Silas looked at her, really looked, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, "You didn't need to come." "I know," she said, "but I wanted to." A beat. Then Ava appeared at the doorway, her eyes lighting up. "Miss Leora." Leora crouched instinctively as Ava ran toward her, arms outstretched. She scooped the girl up, surprised by how naturally the hug came. How right it felt. "You came back," Ava whispered. "I did," Leora said softly. "I missed you." Ava giggled. "Daddy says if people show up twice, it means they're real." Leora glanced at Silas. His jaw tightened just slightly. Did he? They walked together through the snowy schoolyard after Ava's class. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the pavement. "You didn't answer my message," Leora said finally. "I didn't know there was a question," Silas replied. She stopped walking. "You saw me." "I did." "And you left." "I did." Why? He turned to face her. "Because whatever we shared that night, it happened in a snowstorm. In a moment. But that moment passed." Leora's voice was quiet but insistent. "It didn't pass for me." He looked at her for a long time. "Leora, you're the kind of woman who owns buildings like this. I'm the guy who fixes the leaks in the boiler. We don't exist in the same sentence." "Maybe we should," she interrupted. He blinked. She stepped closer, voice trembling just slightly. "I don't care about status. I care that when I was freezing and bleeding and half-conscious, you didn't hesitate. I care that you knew how to hold a child without making her feel small, that you let me go without needing credit, that you didn't tell anyone." She paused, then added, "Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Silas's voice was barely audible. "Maybe that's why I don't belong in it." Leora stared at him, something breaking in her. "You belong in any world you choose." He said nothing. "I'm not here to rescue you, Silas," she added. "But maybe I'm hoping you'll meet me halfway." He nodded slowly, then said almost inaudibly, "I'm not good at halfway." She smiled. "That's okay. I'm stubborn enough to go the extra mile." Later that evening, Silas watched Ava sleep, one hand curled around her dragon, drawing the other, clutching her rabbit. Leora's words echoed in his chest. "You belong in any world you choose." He looked down at his calloused hands. Hands that had scraped paint, lifted boxes, wiped away tears. Hands that had learned to hold loss quietly. And for the first time in a very long time. He wondered if he was allowed to want more. The envelope sat untouched on Silas's tiny kitchen table. Thick ivory, the kind of paper that screamed wealth without ever saying a word. A gold-embossed seal on the flap. No return address. Just his name in looping script, Silas Cade. He hadn't opened it. He didn't need to. He already knew who it was from. Leora had handed it to him that afternoon outside the school, her voice gentle but unwavering. "I want to offer you something," she'd said. "Something real. Not charity, not pity. Just possibility." He hadn't said a word then. Just taken the envelope with fingers that had once held drywall and grief and now held something far more dangerous, hope. Now, in the dim light of his apartment, Silas stared at it like it might explode. Ava's voice broke the silence. "Daddy." He turned. She stood in the hallway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Can I sleep in your bed tonight?" He nodded. Of course, Bug. She climbed in under the covers, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Did the lady leave you a present? Silas hesitated. Something like that. Is it for fixing things in a way? Ava thought for a second. Then maybe you should say yes. He raised an eyebrow. Why? Because when people trust you to fix things, it means they believe in you. Silas swallowed. That kind of wisdom shouldn't come from a 6-year-old. But it did, because she had seen things no child should have seen, had heard the silence after her mother's last breath, had learned to read her father's face like a weather map, when to smile, when to stay quiet, when to ask him to dance in the kitchen because his eyes looked tired. Silas kissed her forehead. Sleep, sweetheart. But he didn't. The next day, Silas stood in front of a gleaming glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, a place where the windows reflected sky and ambition. He didn't belong here, and yet here he was holding the letter that had summoned him like a quiet dare. Inside, a receptionist guided him to the 48th floor, a space that looked more like an art gallery than an office. Soft lighting, sculptures that didn't need to explain themselves, everything expensive but restrained. And then there was her, Leora, standing by the window in a tailored navy dress, her silhouette framed by the city behind her. You came, she said, turning. I read the offer, and it's more than I've ever made in my life. It's still less than you deserve. He studied her. Why me? Leora walked to the desk, picked up a folder, and handed it to him. Inside were photos, leaky ceilings, rusted piping, overloaded wiring. The new Vance Foundation Learning Center, she explained. We bought the building last month. It's falling apart. And you want me to fix it. I want you to lead the team. Your way, your standards, your integrity. He frowned. There are 100 contractors who none of them carried me into a hospital and left without a name. Silence. Then she added, quieter. None of them made me believe in quiet strength. Silas closed the folder. You understand what this looks like, right? A CEO hiring the janitor who happened to rescue her in a snowstorm. Leora met his gaze. If I cared what it looked like, I'd be a coward. And I'm not. Silas exhaled. You're offering me a future, one I didn't ask for. No, she said. I'm offering you choice, something I imagine the world stopped giving you a long time ago. That landed. Hard. Silas looked down at his hands, calloused, worn, hands that had never asked, only given. He thought of Ava, of rent, of asthma meds, of scraped knees and bedtime stories and all the dreams he'd shelved quietly so she could dream louder. Then he looked at Leora, this woman who had everything and yet still showed up with open palms. I'll do it, he said finally, on one condition. Name it. You don't owe me anything. Ever. Leora nodded slowly. Agreed, but I still get to believe in you. He cracked a smile. That sounds like a dangerous habit. I'm known for those. That evening, Silas returned home to find Ava drawing at the kitchen table. She looked up. Did you get the job I think I did? She beamed. Do we get to eat real pancakes now? Pancakes, not the ones from the box. The ones with the crispy edges. Silas laughed, the sound cracking like sunlight through winter. I'll make you a deal, he said, crouching to her level. We start this new chapter with a pancake breakfast. You, me, and maybe a guest. Ava tilted her head. Miss Leora. Only if she's brave enough to face your syrup standards. Ava giggled. I'll make extra dragon ones. He ruffled her hair. For the first time in years, his future didn't feel like a tightrope over concrete. It felt like a door when he was finally ready to open. The first thing Silas noticed was the silence. Not the kind he was used to, the soft, lived-in kind that filled his apartment after Ava fell asleep. No, this was corporate silence. Polished, sterile, the kind that didn't just whisper but warned. The Vance Industries Midtown complex was a monument of glass and ambition. Everything was pristine, The marble floors, the brushed steel fixtures, the way the light streamed in like it had been engineered to flatter the egos that walked through it. And now he was walking through it, wearing his best button-up still a little tight in the shoulders and a borrowed tie from his neighbor down the hall who insisted, "You gotta look like you own the room, even if you're just fixing it." Silas didn't feel like he owned anything here, except maybe the doubt twisting in his gut. "Mr. Cade." A voice cut through the air like scissors. A young man in a tailored suit appeared at his side, tablet in hand. "This way, sir. Miss Vance is expecting you." He followed the man through a maze of hallways until they reached a conference room with glass walls and a view of the skyline so vast it made Silas's lungs tighten. Inside, Leora sat at the head of a long table flanked by executives dressed like power had a dress code. Laptops open, eyes sharp. They all turned when Silas walked in, and suddenly the room didn't feel big. It felt clinical. Leora stood. "Everyone, this is Silas Cade. He'll be leading our site operations at the Foundation Learning Center project." A beat. One of the men, silver-haired immaculate, offered a dry smile. "That's unorthodox." Leora didn't flinch. "So is a city that lets schools fall apart while we invest in rooftop cocktail lounges." A few raised eyebrows. One cleared throat. The silver-haired man spoke again. "And Mr. Cade's experience is—" Silas stepped forward. His voice was steady but quiet. "I've worked maintenance for 17 years. I've rebuilt plumbing with parts that didn't match and fixed heaters in the middle of snowstorms. I've worked graveyard shifts while raising a daughter alone. I don't have degrees or titles, but I know what a building needs to stay standing." Silence. Then Leora added, "And I trust him with mine." That silenced the room more than anything else. After the meeting, Leora walked with him to the elevator. "You didn't have to do that," Silas said. "What introduced you like you deserve to be there? You went toe-to-toe with the board. I hired you because I believe in you, Silas. Not because I wanted to explain you." He studied her. "You're not afraid of pushing back, are you? I've learned the higher you climb, the more you're expected to look down." She turned to face him fully. "But I remember what it felt like to be small and invisible. And I promised myself if I ever had power, I'd use it to lift someone who didn't." Silas's jaw clenched. "You don't need to lift me." "I'm not," she said softly. "I'm walking beside you." Weeks passed. Silas settled into his role like it was stitched into his skin. He hired his own crew people like him. Fathers, veterans, quiet workers who didn't talk much but knew how to make things last. He walked the site every morning at 6 a.m., coffee in one hand, notebook in the other. He let Ava visit on weekends where she'd run through the empty hallways of the Future Learning Center, calling it her castle in progress. Leora visited often, never with an entourage, never in heels. She'd show up in jeans and a simple coat asking questions that weren't for show. One afternoon, as they stood in what would one day be the music room, Silas caught her staring out the window. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I used to dream of buildings like this, spaces that made kids feel safe instead of small." She paused. "My mother worked 3 jobs. I barely saw her, but every once in a while she'd take me to the library on the corner of 42nd and Park. We'd sit by the radiator and read until closing." She turned to him. "It was the only place where I felt like I could breathe, like I mattered." Silas said nothing, just stepped closer. "She died before I made my first million," Leora whispered. "I always thought if I could just make enough noise she'd hear me." Silas's voice was barely a whisper. "Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stay." She looked at him. "Is that what you did?" "Stayed for Ava. Every day." She smiled, then soft and full. "You're better at this world than you think." He shook his head. "This isn't my world. Then maybe we need to build one where both of us belong." That night, after Ava was asleep, Silas stood by the window of his apartment staring out at the distant skyline. The Vance Tower glittered in the dark, beautiful, untouchable. But then he looked down. At the dragon drawing taped to the fridge, the cracked teacup Leora had once handed him, the boots he wore every day, and suddenly it didn't feel like her world and his world. It felt like maybe for the first time there was room. For both. The invitation came in a thick, cream-colored envelope. Gold trim, raised lettering. Leora hadn't written it herself, but the ink still felt personal. Silas stared at it for a full minute before he even opened it. A private appreciation dinner. For project partners and families. Cocktail attire suggested. Childcare provided on site. It didn't say, "You don't belong here." But Silas could still hear it between the lines. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Ava, come here for a second." She ran in from the hallway, a paper crown sliding off her head. "Yes, Your Majesty." He held up the card. "We've been invited to dinner. Fancy dinner, the kind where the forks outnumber the fries." Ava blinked. "Do they have juice?" "I'm not sure, but probably the kind that comes in glass." "Wow," she whispered, then paused. "Do they let kids come?" "They do." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll wear my crown." Leora adjusted the candle on the table. Not because it needed straightening, nothing in this room ever did, but because it gave her hands something to do. The ballroom shimmered in soft gold and silver, crystal lights like falling stars. Soft jazz hummed beneath the laughter of business partners and board members, men in tuxedos, women in gowns worth more than some people's rent. Her world, at least the version of it she'd spent years perfecting. She caught herself glancing at the door every 5 minutes, looking for someone Amelia asked walking by with a tray of wine glasses. Leora hesitated. Maybe. A few more minutes passed. Another speech, a few polite claps, and then the door opened. Silas walked in wearing a suit that didn't quite fit but held his shoulders just right. His tie was crooked. His shoes were polished but scuffed at the edges. And next to him was Ava, wearing a navy blue dress with a plastic crown slightly off-center and a sparkly rabbit purse that blinked when she moved. Leora exhaled. They didn't belong here, but somehow they were the only ones who looked real. She crossed the room with purpose, her heels whispering against marble. "You came," she said. Silas glanced around the room. "Yeah, still waiting for security to escort me out." She smiled. "Don't worry, I bribed them." Ava grinned. "Miss Leora, do you have pancakes here?" Leora knelt. "I'm afraid it's all tiny food and complicated cheese tonight." Ava leaned in whispering, "That's okay." "I brought crackers in my purse." Leora whispered back, "Smart girl." An hour later, Ava was with the other children in the care suite building towers out of mac and cheese and singing a song about dinosaurs who didn't wash their hands. Silas stood at the edge of the ballroom nursing a club soda, his hands in his pockets. Leora appeared beside him holding 2 plates. "They said this is duck, but I'm pretty sure it's just very confused chicken." He chuckled. "I wouldn't know. Ava still thinks nuggets are a food group. I like her already." He looked at her then, back at the crowd. "You move through this world like you were born into it." "I wasn't," she said, "but I learned the steps. Sometimes I wonder if there's a secret manual." "There is," she replied, "but no one reads it. We just copy each other and pretend we understand." They were quiet for a moment. The music swelled. The chandelier above them caught the light just right. Then Silas said, "Why me?" She turned. "What do you mean? You could have chosen anyone. Any contractor. Any architect. Any number of men who would have said yes faster, smiled wider, dressed better." Leora looked him straight in the eyes. "Because you're the only one who didn't try to sell me anything." He blinked. "You didn't pitch. You didn't perform. You just showed up. And not just for me, but for a little girl who couldn't stop shivering and for a stranger who needed help without knowing how to ask." Her voice softened. "You didn't fix my problem, Silas. You reminded me I didn't have to face it alone. After dessert, Leora found Ava sitting alone at the edge of the children's play area staring at her drawing. "Hey," she said, sitting beside her. "What's that?" Ava held it up. It was a child's sketch, 3 stick figures standing under a snowy sky. One tall, one small, one with a sparkly crown. "That's you," Ava said, "because you're brave." Leora blinked. Me, Ava nodded. "Daddy says brave isn't loud. It's just when you do the right thing, even if you're scared." Leora's voice caught. "Your daddy's a smart man?" Ava shrugged. "Yeah, but he still doesn't know how to braid hair." As the evening ended, guests filed out beneath chandeliers and chauffeurs and the quiet hum of classical strings. Silas helped Ava into her coat, adjusting the zipper with calloused hands that had built dreams for other people most of his life. Leora walked them to the door. "Thanks for coming," she said. Silas looked at her, then at Ava, then back again. "Don't thank me." She tilted her head. "Why not? Because this?" He gestured to the night, to the lights, to the illusion. "This isn't us." She hesitated. "Then what is—" He didn't answer. Not yet. But as he turned to leave, Ava called over her shoulder, "Miss Leora." "Yes." "Next time we can just have pancakes at our house." Leora smiled. "That sounds perfect." And for the first time in a long time, something inside her ached not with emptiness, but with longing. The kind of ache that only came when you realized the life you always wanted might be the one you never planned. Silas sat in the dark, the only light coming from his phone screen. The headline glared at him like a slap CEO's fall linked to janitor. His hands trembled not out of anger, not even shame, but fear. Fear for Ava. She was asleep in the next room, clutching her dragon drawing, blissfully unaware that the world outside was spinning faster than her father could hold on to. Silas set the phone down, face down, as if that would quiet it. But the words had already carved themselves into his thoughts. He didn't care about being called the janitor. He'd earned every callus on his hands. But Leora, she didn't deserve this. And now the board, the media, the investors, they were all using him as the excuse to tear her down. And he couldn't let that happen. Not again. Earlier that day, he'd arrived at the Learning Center site, like always, 6:03 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to meet the cement delivery. But the air was different. Tighter. Eyes turned when he walked by. Conversations hushed. Then Jerry, one of his crew, approached him cautiously. "Hey, you seen the papers?" Silas had shaken his head. Jerry handed him his phone. And there it was. Photos from the Vance dinner. Him in the suit. Ava in the crown. Leora laughing beside him like the world didn't know how to break things. The caption stung more than the photo, "From janitor to insider. Who is the man stealing the CEO's attention?" That afternoon, Leora came to the site. Her coat flared in the wind hair, pinned back heels clicking on concrete. She looked as stunning as ever, but her eyes. They were tired. Weary in a way Silas hadn't seen before. He met her by the makeshift office trailer. Said nothing. She handed him a folder without a word. Inside, an internal memo. Effective immediately, Leora Vance suspended pending board review. Silas felt the ground shift beneath him. "You didn't deserve this," he said. Leora exhaled. "Neither did you." He looked at her. Hard. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew what you'd do." He clenched his jaw. "And what's that?" "Run," she said simply. Silas stepped back. "Don't," she added. "Don't disappear on me." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You fought for a world that never really wanted you. And now they're blaming me for your bruises." Her voice cracked. "You're not the reason this happened. I'm the excuse they needed," he said. "And now I'm the shadow over everything you built." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "What's this?" "My resignation?" Leora's breath caught. "Silas, I'm not going to let Ava grow up watching her father be the reason a good woman falls. You're not the reason he cut her off." "Yes, I am. Maybe not directly. But I stepped into a world I was never built for, and it broke something. Tears gathered in her eyes. Don't do this. I already did. That night, Leora returned to her penthouse and found a small box waiting outside her door. Inside the scarf Silas had wrapped around her the night she collapsed. Folded, pressed, clean. On top of it, a single note. You don't owe me, but I owe my daughter peace. She sat on the edge of her bed and held the scarf like it could still carry his warmth. But it didn't. It only carried goodbye. At home, Silas sat by Ava's bed. She stirred, half awake. Daddy, I'm here. She rubbed her eyes. You're sad. He tried to smile. A little, yeah. Did Miss Leora not like the dragon pancakes? Silas swallowed hard. It's not that. Then why? He brushed hair from her face. Because sometimes grown-ups live in different stories, and they don't know how to read each other's pages. Ava blinked. Then maybe they should read slower. He kissed her forehead. You're too wise for your own good. No, she mumbled, drifting back to sleep. I'm just brave. Like her. Meanwhile, Leora sat alone in her office, cleared of half her belongings. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, soft and steady. She turned off the lights. The city glowed below, indifferent, endless. And in the quiet, she whispered not to anyone in particular, I never wanted him to save me. I just wanted him to stay. Leora sat alone in her apartment, the city skyline stretching out behind her like a story she no longer wanted to tell. She hadn't touched her phone in hours. The board had voted. The press had quieted. The Learning Center project had been paused. But the thing that kept her awake far more than scandal or reputation was the echo of a child's voice. Maybe they should read slower. It wasn't just Silas who had left. Ava was gone too. That laugh, that quiet wisdom, that crown slightly askew. And for the first time since her mother's death, Leora felt orphaned. Not because someone had died, but because someone had chosen to walk away. The mail came late that night, delivered by hand from a junior assistant who looked like he had never stepped into a real neighborhood. Urgent delivery from the midtown site, he mumbled, offering a white envelope with smudged edges. Leora opened it carefully. Inside was a folded sheet of paper wrinkled from being held in small hands. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures beneath a snowy sky. One tall, one small, one with a glittering crown. A dragon curled above them, smiling. On the back, in crooked letters, for Miss Leora. We miss you. Love, Ava. And beneath that, in smaller handwriting, Silas's, she drew this yesterday. I told her not to send it, but she said you looked lonely in her drawing. I couldn't argue with that. Leora pressed the page to her chest. The ache in her heart wasn't soft anymore. It was sharp. It was longing, regret, and the terrifying, beautiful clarity that she had been given something rare, and hadn't held it tight enough. The next morning, Leora walked into the boardroom. Not as a CEO, not as a woman who needed to win, but as someone who had already lost what mattered. She took the floor before anyone could stop her. I'm resigning, she said calmly. Gasps, whispers, a few too-pleased smiles. I know what you're thinking, she continued. You think this is about saving face, about damage control. But it's not. She held up the drawing. This is why. Some of the board squinted. One coughed uncomfortably. This is what you all forgot, Leora said, voice steady, that a foundation isn't made of money or concrete. It's made of moments, of children, of stories like this. She turned the paper around slowly. That's Ava. That's Silas. That's me. We weren't a PR stunt. We were a beginning. She paused. And I refuse to be part of a system that punishes people for being real. A beat of silence. Then Leora added softly, but clearly, I'm not walking away from failure. I'm walking toward the truth. And then she walked out. No press statement, no applause, just a woman carrying a child's drawing like it was the most valuable thing she'd ever owned. 3 weeks passed. Leora kept a low profile. She traded boardrooms for school gyms, started showing up at food drives, donated anonymously to hospital wings that didn't bear her name, not because she was hiding, but because this was what her mother would have wanted. And then one day, while volunteering at a city youth fair, she stood at a booth helping a girl fit her arm into a winter coat, 2 sizes too big when someone tapped her shoulder. She turned. No one was there. Just a small white envelope resting on the table. She opened it carefully. Inside a flyer. The Ava Fund inaugural gala, supporting single-parent tradespeople and low-income community schools. A sticky note clipped to the corner. You started this. We just gave it a name. No signature. But she didn't need one. 2 days later, Leora stood in the back of a church-turned-community center, folding chairs, plastic tablecloths, macaroni on paper plates, laughter that didn't need approval. On stage, a young girl read a poem about dragons and moms and stars that never forgot how to shine. Leora watched, smiling softly. Then a voice beside her, deep, warm, familiar. I didn't think you'd come. She turned. Silas, in a flannel shirt, a little thinner, a little tired, but still Silas. She met his gaze, voice soft. Ava invited me. Apparently she runs the foundation now. He smiled. She thinks dragons need better marketing. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by noise that didn't touch them. Then Leora said, I didn't come back for a speech. Good, Silas replied. Because I didn't prepare one. I came because... She faltered. Because you missed her, he asked gently. Leora nodded. And because I realized, I miss you too. Silas looked at her for a long time. Then, you don't have to save the world to matter in it. Her breath caught. You matter, he said. You always did. But now you believe it. Tears filled her eyes. Do you? He hesitated, then took her hand. I'm learning. Later that night, after the tables had been cleared and the lights had dimmed, Ava ran across the hall and wrapped her arms around Leora's waist. You're staying this time, right? Leora crouched and looked her in the eyes. If your dad lets me. Ava turned to Silas. He shrugged. She did draw us into the same picture, and for once no one needed to say another word. The chill of late autumn hung in the air as Silas stood outside the newly reopened Foundation Learning Center. The red ribbon fluttered in the wind, stretched taut across the entrance. Balloons swayed above the canopy, laughter echoed from the courtyard where volunteers handed out books and hot cocoa. But Silas wasn't smiling yet. He looked at the building, really looked at it. This wasn't just concrete and drywall. It was something far more delicate, a second chance. For him, for her, for all the kids who needed a door that wouldn't close in their face. He rubbed the back of his neck. You ever feel like you're just holding your breath for a life you're scared to want? Leora's voice answered quietly from behind him. All the time. He turned. She stood a few feet away in a gray coat, simple and elegant hair down in soft waves. But her eyes carried the stillness of someone who'd finally come home. You weren't supposed to be here until later, he said. She shrugged. It's our ribbon. I figured I earned the right to cut it. A pause. You okay? She asked. Silas hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah, just still doesn't feel real. It will. They stood side by side for a moment, saying nothing, watching. Then Leora offered, You want to do the speech? He raised an eyebrow. You're the one with the degree in public miracles. She smiled. But you're the one who made this real. Silas exhaled. I don't have the words for things like this. She looked at him. Then speak from the place you always do. He frowned slightly. From your quiet, she added. It's louder than most people shouting. Minutes later, Silas stood before a small crowd gathered on folding chairs and sidewalks. Parents, teachers, former janitors, kids with backpacks too big for their shoulders and hope bigger than that. He stepped up to the mic, adjusted it, cleared his throat. "I'm not great with speeches," he began, "but I've spent most of my life fixing things. Doors that wouldn't close, lights that wouldn't turn on, heaters that gave up halfway through winter." A soft chuckle from the crowd. "But this," he gestured behind him, "this wasn't about fixing. This was about believing." He paused, looked at Leora in the front row. Ava sat beside her legs swinging, wearing a new hoodie with a cartoon dragon. "I didn't think someone like me belonged in buildings like this," he continued, "until someone showed me that sometimes the ones who know how to keep the lights on should also be the ones helping design the room." He stepped back. No applause yet, just a breath that seemed to move through everyone present. Then Ava jumped to her feet. 3 cheers for Daddy Laughter, and then the claps came. Not thunderous, but real. Later that afternoon, inside the freshly painted atrium, Leora stood near a display wall titled "Our Builders." Among the photos and quotes and signed thank you cards, there was one picture in the center. It wasn't corporate, wasn't polished. It was a candid Silas kneeling next to Ava, both of them holding paintbrushes. A streak of blue paint across her nose, a smudge of green on his cheek, and written beneath it in simple blocky letters, "Some foundations are built from love." Leora felt tears gather behind her eyes. No one needed to know how much she'd lost to get here, only what she'd found. That evening, as the crowd thinned, Leora sat on the back steps of the building, her heels off bare feet against the cold stone. Silas joined her, handing her a cup of cocoa. She accepted it. "This might be the best thing I've ever tasted." He smirked. "It's just Swiss Miss. It tastes like forgiveness." He looked at her. "You needed forgiving, for doubting that love didn't need to be complicated." She turned to face him, serious now. "I thought I had to earn love, by being useful, by being unbreakable. But you," she paused, "you taught me that love doesn't arrive when you're perfect. It finds you when you're real." Silas swallowed. "Hard. I spent my whole life trying not to be a burden," he said quietly. "But with you, I never felt heavy." Her voice cracked. "That's because you carried me too." He looked at her. "Are we doing this?" "I don't know," she whispered, "but I don't want to not do it anymore." He reached for her hand, found it waiting. Later that night, Ava tiptoed to the living room where they all sat, Silas, Leora, and her sharing a single blanket, watching cartoons and pretending time wasn't moving. She crawled into Leora's lap and whispered, "Can I tell you something?" Leora brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Always. I think the building is happy now." Leora smiled. "Why? Because it finally got to be a home." The snow had started falling again. Not the chaotic kind that shut down highways or canceled plans. No, this snow was quiet, gentle, the kind that softened the world, made even the broken sidewalks look like lullabies. Silas stood on the porch of the newly restored learning center, a string of warm lights glowing above him. It was after hours. The laughter had faded. The children had gone home. But inside, something still flickered. Leora was in the reading room, sitting cross-legged on a rug, flipping through a picture book. Not because she needed to read it, but because Ava had asked her to practice for tomorrow's story hour. The woman who once signed billion-dollar deals now mouthed the words, "The dragon didn't roar." It whispered. And somehow it made more sense than any boardroom ever had. Silas leaned against the doorframe, watching her. She glanced up, smiled. "You know," he said, stepping inside, "I never imagined you'd trade the Vance Tower for a beanbag chair and cardboard dragons." Leora closed the book. "Turns out I like the view from down here." He lowered himself beside her. "I used to think people like you were made of glass." She looked at him. "Fragile, no. Distant, untouchable. Something you could see, admire, but never hold." She reached for his hand. "You didn't hold me. You saw me. That's rarer." He squeezed her fingers gently. "You didn't have to stay, you know." "I know." "Why did you?" Leora looked at the wall across from them. It was covered in crayon drawings, smiling suns, stick figures holding hands, a castle floating above a playground. In one, Ava had drawn a house with 3 windows and 3 hearts in the door. She said softly, because the first place that ever felt like home didn't have walls. It had names. Later that night, Silas packed up the last of the tools in the supply room. The center was whole now, repaired, filled, but something tugged at him, a sense that the chapter was closing, or maybe opening. Leora found him there wiping his hands on an old rag standing in the soft light of the utility lamp. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just thinking. Dangerous." He smirked. She stepped closer. "You've given this place your heart. So have you. I had money. You had meaning." He turned to her. "I had you." Silence settled between them, not awkward but full. Then Leora took a breath. "I'm leaving next week." His heart caught. "Leaving just for a little while. Chicago. There's a team there building a similar project. They asked me to consult, share the model we created here." "Oh," he said. She searched his face. "Say something." Silas looked down. "I want to be happy for you." "You can be," she said, "because you're coming with me." He looked up sharply. "What, you heard me?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Leora, I don't do well in cities with $5 lattes and underground parking." She stepped closer. "That's okay. I don't do well in cities without you." His eyes locked on hers. "What about Ava? She already packed her glitter shoes." He blinked. Leora's voice softened. "Silas, I don't want to build things without you anymore. Buildings, plans, a life." He exhaled, then smiled. "You sure I'm sure?" "Okay. Okay." He took her hand. "But next time you say, 'You're coming with me,' maybe lead with the part where you want us, not just my expertise." She grinned. "Deal." 2 weeks later, at a small gate in a modest airport, Ava tugged at her backpack straps while bouncing on her toes. "Do you think Chicago has pancakes?" Silas laughed. "I think they invented them." Leora raised an eyebrow. "That's not historically accurate." "Doesn't matter," he said, ruffling Ava's hair, "as long as they're warm." As they boarded the plane, Ava darted ahead to the window seat. Silas and Leora followed behind, luggage and hand hearts full. Before sitting down, Silas glanced back out the window. The learning center sat in the distance, glowing gently in the snow, and though he was leaving it, he knew he hadn't walked away. He'd left it better, and somehow it had done the same for him. That night, in a small apartment in Chicago they hadn't yet unpacked, Ava fell asleep under a blanket of storybooks and plush dragons. Silas and Leora sat on the fire escape sipping tea. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You still scared?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not anymore." "Why not?" He kissed the top of her head. "Because for the first time in my life I'm not just building something, I'm living it." She smiled. He looked out over the city, then whispered almost to himself. "Turns out, sometimes the janitor was just an architect in disguise." And from that moment on, they didn't just rebuild walls. They built a life. Together. One small, quiet miracle at a time. Sometimes the quietest stories leave the deepest echoes. Silas didn't wear a cape. He didn't change the world on a stage, but he changed lives in silence, in kindness, in moments no one else saw. And Leora. She learned that real power isn't in what we build, but in who we build it with. What about you? Where are you watching from? And which part of the story spoke to your heart the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the goodness that still exists in ordinary people, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. That one small click helps us bring you even more meaningful stories like this one. And, above all, thank you for spending your time with us today. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never underestimate the quiet ones.